picture this 1968 Burbank, California, sunshine orange blossoms, and like this feeling of optimism in the air.
Yeah.
But just below the surface, a truly dark story was about to unfold.
Wow.
Tonight, we're going deep into the murder of Cheryl Purviller, a young woman whose life was cut short just 7 weeks after getting married.
Oh, wow.
We've got court documents, witness testimonies, and even pieces of a true crime book about the case, and they all point to a story full of lies, shocking betrayals, and a link to another crime that's going to leave you stunned.
You know what really gets me about this case is how it like totally shatters that picture of the perfect suburban life in the late 60s.
Yeah.
You've got this seemingly happy newlywed living in a peaceful neighborhood, and then bam, her life is taken in such a brutal way.
Right.
It's like a really harsh reminder that bad things can happen even in the most unexpected places.
Okay, so let's set the scene.
Right?
It's April 20th, a little before midnight. A young couple is walking back to their apartment when they see Cheryl's car, a really nice Jaguar. Parked with the engine running and headlights on. It seems normal at first, but then they get closer and realize something is really wrong.
And this is where the mystery starts. Cheryl is slumped over in the driver's seat, barely alive and covered in blood.
Oh my gosh.
She'd been shot twice in the head and beaten really badly on the passenger seat as a gun. And here's where it gets interesting. It's inscribed, "Love Paul," belonging to her husband, Paul Purviller.
But here's where things start to feel like they don't quite add up. Cheryl's purse is untouched. Her expensive car is still there, and the shell casings are found on the other side of the car from where she was shot.
Right.
Doesn't really sound like a robbery, does it?
No, not at all. And as the police started asking around the neighborhood, even more confusing details came out. Several neighbors said they heard gunshots that night, but not one of them called the police.
Wow.
It makes you think, what would you do? Would you be too scared to do anything, or would you act?
It really makes you think about that bystander effect and how sometimes even in a close community, people hesitate to get involved.
Yeah.
But back to Paul Purviller, the husband. A background check reveals some red flags. He's an ex-LAPD officer fired for being involved in an illegal abortion.
Wow.
And get this, he recently worked in, of all things, the life insurance industry.
Ah, yes, the life insurance part, that's going to be a big part of this story.
Right.
2 years before Cheryl's murder, a man named Marlon Cromwell was found shot dead in his burned-down house.
Okay.
His wife, Christina, had taken out a large life insurance policy on him just before he died.
Right.
And guess who she worked with at the insurance company? Paul Purviller.
Hold on. So we have 2 deaths now, both with life insurance policies, and Paul Purviller is connected to both. That's not just a red flag. That's a whole bunch of red flags.
Yeah, and it gets more complicated. A big chunk of that insurance money from Marlon's death went straight to Paul, which he then used to buy his first bar.
Wow.
The police at the time were suspicious, but they couldn't prove he did anything wrong.
So we're left with a really unsettling question. Was Paul just really lucky to be connected to 2 deaths with life insurance payouts, or was something darker going on?
That's the question that's going to drive the rest of this deep dive.
Wow.
Stay with us as we untangle this web of intrigue and uncover the truth behind Cheryl Purviller's murder.
Okay, so I've got Paul Purviller, an ex-cop with a shady past, linked to 2 deaths that had life insurance payouts involved.
Yeah.
It's already starting to feel like one of those classic film noir movies, you know?
Oh, totally. And just like in those old movies, the plot twists keep coming.
Okay.
Remember Christina Marlon Cromwell's widow?
Yeah.
Well, not long after her husband's death, she went through like a major transformation.
Right.
New hair, new clothes, a whole new look. It seemed like it was all orchestrated by, guess who? Paul Purviller.
Wait, so he's not just making money from these deaths, but he's also maybe manipulating the women involved too.
Mm-hmm.
That makes this whole story even creepier.
It does. The police were suspicious of their relationship, but they didn't have enough proof to arrest them.
Okay.
But then Cheryl's murder changed everything. All of a sudden, Paul was back in the spotlight, and this time they found out she had taken out a life insurance policy on Cheryl, too.
Oh, wow.
And not just any policy. It had a double indemnity clause for accidental death or murder.
Double indemnity, just like in the movie. It's like Paul was taking ideas from a Hollywood script, except this was real life with real consequences.
Yeah, and speaking of real-life drama, Paul's first wife, Isla, comes forward with a terrifying story about their marriage.
Okay.
She says he was abusive and even tried to kill her, making it look like hit-and-run accidents.
Oh, my God.
Can you imagine living with that kind of fear, wondering when the next accident would happen?
It's just awful to think about what Isla went through. It reminds you that the worst things can be happening behind closed doors, completely hidden from everyone else. And it also shows how incredibly strong survivors are to come forward and talk about it.
Absolutely. Isla's testimony was a huge turning point in the investigation. It backed up the growing feeling that Paul was capable of violence and lying. But what really sealed his fate was a confession from someone you wouldn't expect, his coworker and friend, Alan Halverson.
So Paul actually told someone about his crimes. What did he say?
Okay, picture this, a dark bar.
Yep.
Two coworkers having drinks after work. Paul, feeling a little loose from the alcohol and maybe a bit too trusting, confesses to Alan that he killed Marlon Cromwell.
Wow. He really thought he could share that and get away with it.
Yeah, it's a classic case of talking too much and getting caught.
So what did Alan do with this information? Did he go straight to the police?
Well, not right away.
Okay.
He was scared of Paul and what might happen if he talked.
Right.
But as the investigation into Cheryl's murder went on, Alan's guilt just kept growing. He knew he couldn't keep quiet any longer.
So he finally broke down and told the police everything.
He did, and that must have been huge for the prosecution.
It must have been Alan's confession, plus all the other circumstantial evidence they had led to the arrest of both Paul and Christina. The media went crazy comparing it to the movie Double Indemnity, with all the greed, betrayal, and murder.
Yeah, life imitating art, or in this case, imitating a really dark and twisted movie.
But even with a confession and all that evidence, could they actually get a conviction?
That's what we'll find out in the last part of our deep dive. Was Paul Purviller able to talk his way out of it, or did justice finally catch up with him?
All right, so it's all coming down to this, the courtroom. Paul Purviller, the once charming ex-cop turned insurance agent, is now accused of planning not one, but two murders.
Yeah.
And all for money. So did the prosecution actually convince the jury, or did Paul's carefully crafted act hold up?
Well, this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. The prosecutor in this case was Vincent Bugliosi.
Oh, wow.
You might recognize that name. He later became famous for prosecuting the Manson family.
Right.
He was known for being super thorough and his ability to put together these convincing stories from what seemed like random pieces of information.
Wow, the prosecutor who took down Charles Manson was involved in this case, too. That's incredible. Paul's defense team must have been really worried.
Definitely Bugliosi was a master in the courtroom. He laid out all the financial stuff, the weird timing of the deaths, and the witness statements. It was like watching someone weave a tapestry with each thread connecting to the next.
Right.
Creating this undeniable picture of Paul's guilt.
And remember, they never actually found the person who shot Cheryl or Marlon.
Right.
So it all came down to proving to the jury that Paul was the brains behind it all.
Exactly. It was a case built on circumstantial evidence, but Bugliosi presented it so clearly and with so much conviction that the jury had no doubt about Paul's guilt.
Wow.
They found him guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Remember Isla's testimony about the accidents?
Right.
Christina was found guilty of 1 count of first-degree murder for Marlon's death.
So justice was served. I mean, a man who could manipulate and kill for money is finally being held accountable.
Yeah, but the story doesn't end there. Remember Christina's shocking revelation?
Oh, yeah.
The one about Paul trying to have his own parents killed for insurance money a few years earlier?
It's almost impossible to believe, even with everything else we've learned about him. It's like he had zero morals.
That revelation just solidified the picture of Paul as a truly ruthless and calculating person. A man driven by pure greed and wanting to save himself.
Right.
He was sentenced to death, which was unusual considering the evidence they had.
Wow.
Christina got a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 7 years. But then a few years later, California got rid of the death penalty.
So Paul's sentence was changed to life in prison, giving him a chance at parole. Did he ever show any remorse for what he did?
Well, there's no record of Paul ever admitting to his crimes or showing any real regret.
Oh.
But the fight for justice wasn't over Isla, Paul's first wife, and Alan, his former co-worker, along with the district attorney's office. They all worked tirelessly to keep Paul locked up.
Isla and Alan, the two people Paul tried to silence, became his biggest opponents. That's amazing. It shows how resilient and determined they were.
Yeah, they refused to let Paul get away with his crimes even after all those years, and they had a powerful ally in Christina.
Oh.
After she was paroled, she agreed to testify against Paul, giving even more chilling details about his manipulative ways and how cold-heartedly he was willing to use and discard anyone who got in his way.
So the two women who had been hurt by Paul, Isla, and Christina, they teamed up to make sure he could never hurt anyone again. It's like something out of a Greek tragedy.
It really is. It's a story about betrayal, greed.
Right.
And in the end, the triumph of bravery and resilience in the face of pure evil.
Right.
Paul's requests for parole have been denied over and over, and he's still in prison today.
But even with Paul behind bars, there's still this one unanswered question: who actually shot Cheryl and Marlon?
Right.
We know Paul was the mastermind, but the real killer is still a mystery.
It's a scary thought, isn't it, to think that someone capable of such violence might be out there free.
Yeah, it is.
But this case also shows how powerful the truth is and how important it is to speak out against injustice, even when it's risky.
This deep dive into the chilling story of Paul Purviller has been a wild ride with so many twists and turns and betrayals.
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's a glimmer of hope. It's a reminder that even in the darkest situations, hope can win out. And those who try to manipulate and take advantage of others will eventually face justice. What stands out to you the most about this case? What questions do you still have?
Right.
Let us know. We love hearing your thoughts. And until next time, remember, even in the sunny suburbs, darkness can be hiding. Stay curious and maybe just a little bit cautious.